moving on to what we're going to be talking about, community impact of substance abuse. Again, there's a few things I want to cover, and all of these are going to be pretty much things that I've actually seen here at Muskego High School. Some of them I experience frequently, some of them not so much. I'll kind of start in order of what I see the most and kind of work it down to what I see the least. And then at the end, I'm actually going to spend just a couple minutes on what I think is going to be coming our way, likely in the near future, but hopefully pushed off as far as we can make it. So just to talk about it, I'll go over vaping and Delta 8. Do either of you guys know what Delta 8 is? No? Okay, we'll talk about that. Cough syrup, the Benadryl challenge, some pills that I believe are being abused here. And then what it says on there for up and coming would be nasal sprays, and the upcoming ones are a bunch of names that you've probably never heard before, but I think you will in the near future. So just talking about vaping, I actually brought our current collection from this year. Since we have 2 people, what's that? Yeah, these are all things that we found on students this year. So just to briefly go over some of this stuff, vaping was invented in 2003, so it's only been around for 19 years. And it was actually invented by someone in China that his father passed away to lung cancer from smoking cigarettes. And so he had good intentions of wanting to create something that lets people smoke, but is still safer than cigarettes. And so the e-cigarette was kind of born there. It stayed in China, and eventually in 2006 it went international, and then it became more popular in the United States in the early 2010s. We didn't really see it in the high schools until like 2014 to 2016. The main parts of a vape device are... Yes. So the actual statute is possession by a student, or possession of a nicotine product by a student on school property. And there's actually 2 different ones. There's that, where you're actually holding one of these on your person or in your backpack or in your car. And the other one is actually using one. So what will happen sometimes is a group of 8 people will have a vape device, and they'll all pass it to each other. And then they're like, well, I don't have it. But if you're using it, the city views it as the same thing, because we don't want anyone using this stuff in school. So what you actually have, there's 4 different parts. So there's the battery, which is generally the large part that you see on a vape device. There's the mouthpiece, which is normally what's on top in black. There's the vape juice, which is actually in a cartridge. You can, with a pair of pliers, pull this off, and it will actually show the vape juice inside. It's normally a clear vial. And that vape juice has a lot of stuff. There's still studies ongoing, because this has been around for such a short amount of time. We don't know what's actually in there and if it's safer than cigarettes or not. We do know that there's carcinogens, cancer-causing particles. If you use this often enough, it can cause what's called popcorn lung. And there's obviously nicotine, which is damaging to your body and is addictive. So it's basically a liquid that goes in there. What happens is there's a heating coil, and when you press the button and inhale, it will actually take that liquid, heat it up, and turn it into a vapor so that you can inhale it into your lungs and puff it out just like a cloud of smoke. It's supposed to be, yeah. My bet is that it's not, and that in 50 years we're going to see a lot of the same stuff. But, on a personal note, it's sad because when I was in high school, vaping did not exist. And cigarettes really didn't exist either. There was maybe 1 or 2 kids that had smoked or were smoking, but it was not nearly as prevalent as it is now, at least, in my experience. So it's kind of sad to see it make a comeback, and I'm sure tobacco companies in general are just loving it because they're all getting drawn back into nicotine, which was almost kind of defeated by all the advertisements that were going across the nation. So it started off with some of the larger ones, if I can find it. Like this would be kind of like an old school one. It's flat, it's kind of large. This would be more of a new one. And then if I can find it, yeah. They started off kind of like this. They were gigantic. They were sort of bricks. This weighs, it feels like probably 8 ounces. Right. And I'll actually hand this out so you guys can look at it. The battery in this is gigantic, and you probably got about 500 hits or like inhales that you could take off of this, which might seem like a lot, but that would be almost nothing these days. In like the 8 years that it's been in high schools, this probably has about 1,500 hits that you could take off of it, and it's pretty new. And there's some in here that have up to 5,000 that you can take. So,
where are they buying these, and how much do they cost?
Good question.
Are they 18 years old, or?
You do. So it gets a little complicated. So that's what they did look like. And then in 2020, the federal government passed a law saying that you cannot have flavored vapes anymore because it was becoming so prevalent in high school. And technically the age was lifted up to 21. However, not every state has enacted that, and the tobacco, or I should say vaping companies, have worked around that because instead of having just these flavored refillable vapes, they now use what are called disposable vape devices. And so instead of it being like you keep your battery in that base that's heavier, they all went lighter, so it's supposed to be you use it and then you just throw it away. So that's kind of how they've worked around it. And so something like this is kind of a very common one that we see here. This is probably like $20. The button is basically the dot inside of that P. This is called a Posh Plus. And you probably get 1,000 to 1,500 hits off of this. This is also a Posh Plus brand, and you probably get about 3,000. So 20, maybe 30. And then this one that I had showed that actually has a little bit of a screen on there, these generally cost about 50 to 60. But it gets even more complicated than that because, again, if you take a pair of pliers and you pull this off, these specifically, these are called Smoke Novos. There's a little rubber tab that you can actually get access into that cartridge that holds the liquid. And we've confiscated, there might be one more in there, but these are actual juices that contain nicotine, and you can refill the cartridge and put it back in your vape. It takes 10 seconds, and you basically get to start all over. And now, for some reason it's outlawed. I'm still not sure how this is legal, but a lot of them use the same charging ports as cell phones. So now you basically buy it once, and as long as you can continue to get juice, you never need another one in your life. So it gets really tricky. The place that you can buy these is gas stations. You can buy them at vape shops. And as far as I know, those are the only two. However, my opinion is that these are marketed to kids. Here, I'll pass these out so you guys can look at them. Yeah, right next to Piggly Wiggly. So, in my opinion, the marketing for this is mainly for kids. You know, adults smoked cigarettes for years. They could have put flavors in the cigarettes for a long time, and it never happened because adults like, you know, maybe menthol or just that traditional tobacco flavor. All of these are flavored. Peach, cherry, raspberry, lime. They all have some sort of like candy smelling flavor, fruity smelling flavor. And in my opinion is it's to attract kids. You can also buy them in all these different fancy colors to make them look cool and trendy. And you can even get labels on them that, you know, that are like from TV shows. Like if you've heard of Rick and Morty, it's an animated TV show. You can get vape devices that have that on the cover. And so in my opinion, it's mainly geared towards teenagers. And another reason I think that I have some that are called Juul Pods in there. It was designed for you to actually plug into your computer so that you could tell teachers it was a USB flash drive. And so a teacher would be like, what's that? You plug it in and it lights up. And you say, I can hand it over there. You say, look, it's just from my computer. The teacher would be like, oh, okay. And you'd actually just get to keep it out in the open in class. And so it was even geared for students to kind of get around some of the barriers that would be natural in a school. Yeah, and I've kept these in my office. My office smells pretty good. So.
And that's ridiculous. I mean, it's hard for, especially for a kid, it's hard to resist that.
Absolutely.
What that scent.
Yeah. And, you know, these shops, like there's one next to Piggly Wiggly called Cloud X. They typically, I'll ask kids how they get it. There's one of two ways. The first one is they have an older sibling or someone that's in college that will buy a bunch, bring them back to the high school. Someone in the high school will sell it to others. The second way is they will just go to the shop themselves and buy it. I've had probably half a dozen to a dozen kids come in and after they're caught say, yeah, the guy doesn't card and everyone knows it, so you can just go there and as long as you don't look like you're 10, you're probably going to be able to buy it. Because that shop owner or employee who's there, I'm sure knows like this is the base or like the main base of his customers. So it's hard to fight because the store wants them to come in. They all want to go in. There's, you know, they work hand in hand. So we're taking steps as a police department to make sure that, you know, that doesn't happen anymore. But it all takes time and there's, you know, they want to make their money and kids want to get their vapes. So it's tricky. As far as for here in the school, they used to be large and then they got very small and now they're kind of getting larger again so they can get more hits out of the vapes. So the size themselves are actually tricky to conceal. A lot of times guys can keep them in their pockets. That's not that difficult. Girls will generally keep them in their bra. But for people that know they're going to be searched a lot because they're just in that circle of people that seems to, you know, visit our offices a lot, They will hide them in the ceiling tiles. They'll hide them behind the toilet. And bathrooms seem to be a common spot because they know there's no cameras there. So the way it normally works is we'll get a report that someone smelled something, or sometimes you can hear them inhaling, and we'll bring them into our office, and I'll use a metal detector wand. And what I always tell them before is, if it's a girl, I'm not going to search you, a female will come, but we're not going to put hands on unless we actually have to search. Excuse me. And so if you have something on you, please hand it over. A lot of times I'll turn around, they'll take it out of their bra and hand it over. I've had a couple where guys will actually keep it in their boxers, in their private area, and they forced me, I can tell the metal detector wand is buzzing, they forced me to go and actually find it. Which is really unfortunate that they go to that lengths to hide it, but unfortunately there's a job to do on my end, so. It's really tricky. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, because when I ask kids, why do you do it? The main answer is, well, everyone else is doing it. They all want to fit in. It's supposed to be cool. There's some parents that know their kids are vaping. Some kids are actually addicted, and their parents try and buy them patches and gum with nicotine in it to curb it, but it's tough. Those juices that I showed you, I don't think I said this, they vary between 5% nicotine and 40% nicotine. And so you can actually gauge the strength of what you're using based on that. So if you want to wean yourself off, you just buy, weaker and weaker juices until you can stop. They can. So that actually leads me to my next point. Good segue.
Does anyone smoke regular cigarettes anymore?
I don't think so. Not in the school, because it's such an obvious odor, and that cloud lasts in the air for so long. Because this is more of a vapor, it dissipates very quickly. I've actually had kids at the middle school and high school that have smoked in class, and teachers won't always catch it. But I'll always hear a week or two later, like, this person vaped, and the teacher didn't even know. And it's really easy to say that's hand sanitizer or lotion because of how fruity it smells. So, yeah, it constantly evolves. This game is changing all the time. And the popular devices now will not be in a year or two. And yeah, we'll just keep changing. So, so that is vaping. Moving on to Delta 8, so marijuana. A little bit of backstory, history on marijuana. Everything you've known about marijuana is what's called Delta 9 THC. That's what the strain is called. And the reason that's important is that's what the federal government has banned. That's why it's been illegal. Some states have started to actually allow Delta 9, but the federal government still technically has not allowed it. The reason that's important is there's a new strain called Delta 8. And the world of marijuana has totally changed. So in the 60s and 70s, what was known as marijuana, the green leafy substance, that had probably about 3% potency. Now we have an umbrella of marijuana products called concentrates, and they go anywhere from 20 to 99% concentrated marijuana. So there are dispensaries now in places like Colorado, California, Illinois. The marijuana you get from there is probably about 22 to 28%, so it's still somewhat mild, but much stronger than what would have been smoked in the 60s and 70s. And it's typically not smoked in a glass bowl anymore. When I first started as a police officer on the road, when we'd arrest people for possession of marijuana, it was the glass bowl. Now it's all vape devices. And you can put these concentrated things, they have all different names. There's dabs, there's wax, shatter, batter, there's gummies, there's liquid that you can do in vapes, and there's something called butane hash oil, where you actually extract liquid from the marijuana and then cook it off with a butane torch, and what's left over is very concentrated marijuana that you can actually put into your system to get high. So it's really alarming, and I'm still learning about that world as I'm growing up in law enforcement, because these people are one step ahead. And you really could. I mean, these people are smart, and I think once it was legalized in some states, that's why the inventiveness is really taking off with what they can do with this. So you almost never see green leafy substance anymore. It's normally a liquid that you can actually put in a vape device. There's one in here that has nicotine, but it actually looks like a typical one that would hold marijuana in it. I had it set aside, and then of course I lost it. Here we go. So something like this is typically what you would see in marijuana. It doesn't have all the colorful stuff. It's kind of nondescript. And the difference in the liquid is that nicotine, if you do this, the liquid will move very quickly inside, going back and forth. Because that marijuana is so concentrated, it actually moves very slow like a wax. And so you can see it just barely tilts side to side. And it's normally more yellowish. It's kind of the point for me now that I can look at a vape and pretty much know if it's going to be weed or nicotine pretty much immediately. So. It does. The tricky part is if it's in the vape device, it does not. So if they've been used a lot, sometimes that odor will linger on the mouthpiece, but it's actually tricky even for our canines to, like when we bring them in once a month for our classroom sniffs, we still find them, but I would say there's probably some that don't give off as much of an odor. So it's tricky. So in addition to these concentrates, like for instance, a gummy would have like 25 milligrams of THC. THC is the psychoactive element in marijuana, and that's what needs to be present in order for it to be illegal. Like CBD oil, it's marijuana, but it does not have the THC, so you don't get high off of using like a lotion. So you need THC to be in there. It's always concentrated, always elevated in these products now. And there are synthetics that actually make marijuana copy other drugs. And so if you wanted to have marijuana that acted like cocaine or methamphetamine, there are different strains that have been created that will actually make that happen. And I can't explain the science, it's way beyond me, but it's out there. So, scary stuff. There's a phrase kind of coming out now, it's called greening out, and it's when you actually overdose on cannabis. So, that's just the reality that we live in now. So, Delta 8. I mentioned this before, Delta 9 is what's actually illegal. Delta 8 is not. And the tricky part is that because it's not technically illegal, because it's a brand new strain, businesses are allowed to sell it. So we have Delta 8 being sold in Muskego, and it's actual marijuana, and it gets you high. The difference in Delta 8 versus Delta 9 is that it gives you about half of the high that you would get from traditional marijuana, but you don't get any of the negative side effects. So if you were to smoke too much marijuana, sometimes it can give you anxiety, a little bit of paranoia. You typically do not get that in Delta 8. And that's sort of what the appeal is. They've just, it's more mild, but it's improved because you don't have to worry about negative side effects. You can. So it's at CloudX right now. And you can get it in vapes, you can get it in gummies, you can get it in traditional green leafy substance as well. And so our students use this stuff. And, unfortunately, it's been brought into our schools, it's in our kids' cars, and it's in our kids' homes. I think kids are a little bit more wise to it than they let on, but the typical conversation I have when we find it is, well, it's Delta 8, it's not illegal. And I have to tell them, the law actually bans the presence of THC. And because Delta 8 just has a more mild form of THC, it's still illegal. So as of right now, whenever we have a product, I actually have a test kit that I can use to show the presence of it. And the Delta 8s that I've seen will show that it's in there, and then I can legally make an arrest on that. My guess is that as the product improves, they will find a form that's not as testable, and I won't be able to see it in there. And then I would not actually be able to make an arrest because I have to prove that the THC is in there. So they probably will. It's one of those things where they'll keep leapfrogging each other. But so far, the cannabis industry has been a couple steps ahead, I would say. A fine for vaping is $155.50. A fine for possession of marijuana in the city of Muskego is probably about $1,400. So it's $800 for the actual possession of a controlled substance, which is THC, and then possession of drug paraphernalia, which would be the vape pen or the glass bowl or whatever it might be. Because typically, unless you have gummies, you need something to actually get the marijuana into your system. So, again, kind of a new world. Delta 8 is probably going to take over. And then who knows? In 5 years, everything might be legalized anyway. That's hard to say. Any questions on that? No? Moving on. I wanted to talk about some of the clothing trends, just so you might be able to recognize it in your kids or the friends that they hang out with. These are all things that I've noticed here in the school personally, and if you see any of these things, it just should your antenna should go up. The big one is the Cookies brand that you see in the upper right-hand corner. Cookies is a known pro-marijuana clothing brand. So anyone that's wearing that, I've had kids, I just like Sesame Street. Sometimes it has the Cookie Monster staring up over the letters. They know what it is because there's no other Sesame Street character that goes along with these clothes. And no one liked Cookie Monster 5 years ago, so they know what it is. It's basically showing there's a whole culture of marijuana now, and they want to show that they are in support of it. And so there's nothing necessarily illegal about wearing the shirt, but if they're wearing the shirt, normally use and clothing go hand in hand. And so it doesn't give me the right to necessarily search them, but again, my antenna goes up, and it's just someone that I'm more likely to keep an eye on in the future. I've seen the Cookies hats, Cookies sweatshirts, Cookies sandals, and the most concerning one is Cookies backpacks. They actually design a backpack that's odor-proof. So you can keep your stuff in there, and even if the canine comes around, unless you had, you know, some kind of drug sitting on the outside of the backpack for a long period of time, they're going to walk right by it and not smell it. I personally have not seen one of the backpacks, but my guess is that it's a matter of time until someone brings it. Just some of the other ones that are there. Oddities 3000. It's generally some kind of like galactic themed clothing. So I have one on there that's really obnoxious. It's the pizza on the marijuana leaf. But generally, if you have one of those things where it looks like the Milky Way and it's across the whole sweatshirt, that can have ties to marijuana use. Not a guarantee. Some people just like that style of clothing, and there's people wearing it that I would say probably not involved in this world, but you never know. And then the last one that I wanted to point out is that crown symbol. It's on the hat in the lower left-hand corner, and that I kind of blew it up in the middle. That brand is called No Bad Ideas, and they actually specialize in stash compartments. So like specifically in the hat, there is Velcro at the top that you can pull down, and you can stick whatever you want in there, which would typically be drugs in a small baggie. They also have backpacks that have special stash compartments in like the straps, and there are parts of the backpack that you can have hidden zippers that you can open, and there's like a hidden compartment there. Kids try and do it on their own. They'll sometimes cut little slits in the straps. They can like slide stuff up. But typically what I do is empty out the backpack and just press it completely flat to make sure I'm not missing anything. And I've had a couple where they actually have something sort of hidden, and I'm able to kind of fish it out. So, the big one, I have it on here, but not a picture of it. There are some Nike shoes that actually have the backwards swoosh, and if it's backwards, that signals that there's a stash compartment there. There's a part in the sole of the shoe that will actually slide out so that you can put something in there, and then you just slide it back in. So when I say it's like a whole world of stuff, I mean, it's really involved, and there's a lot there. If you are ever interested in this stuff, you can go on social media sites, like Reddit is a really good one, and you can follow. I think the big cannabis one is called Trees. There's like 2 million followers on there, and they all talk about how they get away with this stuff, how they actually make their own marijuana, and the different methods that they use to get it into their bodies. So, any questions on clothing?
They'll do a lot of work to get that stuff.
Yes, they do. All right, so moving on. Cough syrup. Are either of you familiar with cough syrup abuse? Heard of it. So it had different names for slang on the street, like 20 years ago. Some of the more common ones: purple drank, scissor, double cupping, Texas tea. They all kind of mean the same thing. The more typical one that we hear nowadays is lean, and it's sort of making a resurgence, if that's the word, because there are some people making popular rap songs and they mention lean in it. There's probably 3 or 4 different ones, and so it's become in the vernacular now again. What you need for cough syrup is basically prescribed cough syrup that has promethazine and codeine. Those are actual medical names, and it's important to have that because it's quote unquote the good stuff. What you do is you take it and you put it in a styrofoam cup, and you generally mix it with some kind of soda, Sprite, Fanta, something like that that's a little bit more fruity. And when you blend it together, it makes that like purplish color, because most cough syrup is purple. That's prescribed. You take a normal dose, which I believe is like 15 to 30 milligrams. It'll just work the way it's supposed to and suppress your cough. If you take 10 to 20 times that amount, it has a lot of different effects on your body. So for the next things that I'm talking about, the effects generally go in the same pattern. The first thing that you'll feel is euphoria, and that'll be like the lowest form of abuse or the lowest form that you can abuse it by taking too much. And the further you go down the line of abuse, meaning the more you take, the worse the effects get. So for cough syrup specifically, it starts off with euphoria, and then you end up having slower breathing. It can cause a heart attack. It can also sometimes cause seizures. And there's really clear signs of intoxication with it. I've only actually seen someone intoxicated from cough syrup on patrol. I have never seen someone with actual codeine cough syrup here in the school. They stumble. It looks just like they're drunk. Slurring their words, slow to respond, not much coordination. It's very apparent. And the reason that we can a lot of times tell is I'll use a breathalyzer on the road, and they'll blow zeros. And I'm like, well, there's no alcohol. It must be something else. And then when you actually search the car and you see styrofoam cups, a lot of times the prescription bottle for the cough syrup will still be in there. They're all very clear signs of what they're taking. Haven't seen it here in the school, but it's still a trend because our students do not have the prescriptions. they just get Dayquil and they mix it with soda and they think that that does the trick. That will still affect them, but not in the same way. I can tell you we've had more than one event with cough syrup here in our school. And that's why I say it's a trend, because kids know about this and they want to abuse it. And do they actually get to the point that, you know, they're going to die? No, because you need multiple bottles for that or stronger stuff, but there is still the risk. Am I missing anything there? One other thing, anything with a prescription, in case you're not aware, you can't hand it out to anybody else, and you can't take someone else's prescription medication. It's actually a crime. It starts off as a misdemeanor. So say someone had the good stuff and they were to share it with someone else here in school, they would likely be expelled for sharing a controlled substance, and they would definitely be arrested by me with the charges referred to county court for sharing a prescription medication. So, dangerous stuff. The big cough syrup brands are Activist, Walkhart, and Tris. And what you'll hear in slang a lot, they'll say like, oh, I have some Walk. And that's just the brand, like Dayquil. So Walk and Tris, I would say, are the big two. And they're both that kind of purplish color. So. I mentioned that a lot of times they use Dayquil or NyQuil. And NyQuil is more blue, so sometimes when they mix it with Sprite, it does give that bluish color. That's actually something different because of the active ingredient in there. And all the rest of the substances that I talk about are technically legal, which is what makes it really scary. Because for our students that were using, I will say NyQuil, because it was NyQuil, they do not get arrested because it's not a controlled substance. It's not illegal to be in possession of NyQuil and to mix it with soda. Highly frowned upon, but there's nothing actually illegal about it. What comes into play, though, is school policy. That, one, you have to turn all your medication into the office, and two, you're not allowed to share any medication with friends, and that's actually in school policy. And so there's still some consequences they give on the school side, but I kind of have to hold up my hands and say, I'm out, there's nothing I can do. Not that you necessarily want to add punishment onto punishment, you more want to help them and give them resources, but that's just some background on this. So the active ingredient in a lot of pills instead of syrups is called DXM or dextromethorphan. And it does a lot of the same stuff, it's just that the active ingredient is different. So I wrote down there's like 8 different ones you can take. Coricidin, Dayquil, Equate, which is the Walmart brand, Robitussin, Mucinex, Delsum, and Theraflu. All of those, generally you'd buy them in pill form. If you guys remember 5 to 10 years ago, there was a big thing about Sudafed and how you could buy it over the counter and then make basically like crystal meth off of it. They ended up taking it and putting it behind the counter so that no one can get access. And if you'll notice now, if you try and buy a bottle of Dayquil, I actually did because I was sick like a month ago, they ID check you now. And it's because of the high level of abuse that's coming off because it's legal and so many people can get their hands on it. So it's called Robotrippin. And again, you could do it in capsule form and it starts off at euphoria, but the more that you abuse it, I think, I have the amounts on here. A dose is about 30 milligrams. If you do about 200 milligrams, you get that euphoric feeling that you actually get high. 400 to 500 milligrams, it becomes a hallucinogenic. You start seeing patterns on the walls, people's appearance starts changing, and you start seeing things that aren't really there. And at about 1,500 milligrams, so you're looking at, almost 100 times the abuse, they call it poor man's PCP. So it's a disassociative, meaning you don't really know who you are, you're more animalistic, you don't feel pain. And so for someone that does take PCP, they're very concerning to officers because there's not a lot we can do to actually bring that person down and get them into custody because they don't respond to pain the way that a normal person would. It's almost like their nerves are cut off and they don't send the right signals to the brain. They do because tasing actually interrupts the brain signals to the muscles, so your muscles will still tense up, but they won't feel the pain that comes along, and a lot of times the pain of getting tased again is what gets them to cooperate. So if they don't get that and they just feel their muscles do this and then relax, they're probably not going to stop fighting. I have never seen someone take enough dextromethorphan to actually get to that point, but the risk is always there. And again, if you take enough, it can actually kill you. A lot of these things, it ends in coma and death if you get to a high enough point, which for high schoolers, some of which, barely being 100 pounds, they probably would need less of this to get the same effect. So DXM and cough syrup like codeine, they go hand in hand, but the active ingredient is different. Next one, Benadryl. Are either of you familiar with the Benadryl challenge? No?
I think I've heard of it. It's recent.
Yeah, very recent.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So with social media becoming bigger and everyone having some kind of account now, and there's been a lot of challenges over the years. One of which was the cinnamon challenge, where you take a spoonful of cinnamon and you can't breathe, you cough like crazy. One was the Tide Pod challenge. You bite down on these things, and people, I believe, were actually dying from that and getting hospitalized. The latest one is the Benadryl challenge, and it's basically you take as much Benadryl as you can. I was surprised at this when I first heard it. It's Benadryl. It's an allergy medication. What does it do? Turns out people in the know and have been in the drug world for a while, they know that it actually, say you use narcotics like cocaine, and you can't get your hands on cocaine, you can take a bunch of Benadryl and it will actually give you the same effect. So it'll take away they call it the narc itch, for a brief period of time. And because Benadryl is so much easier to get access to, people will abuse that because it's legal, and you can have Benadryl in your backpack or in your car, and officers probably aren't even going to raise an eyebrow at it. But if you have enough of it, easily abused. So I have amounts on here. Yeah, so a normal dose, which would be like one pill, is 25 milligrams. If you take around 500 milligrams, you actually start to hallucinate. I've personally seen this with 2 students in the last year, and I know other school resource officers have seen it with some of their students as well. And I can tell you, started off speaking with them when they told me what they did, because as police officers, I was just kind of in the know that this might be coming. I knew you have to get them to a hospital immediately. It's extremely dangerous because you can go into a coma and you can die, and there's not much warning about it. And not that it got to that extent, but I could see how quick, they went downhill when they took this stuff. It was actually at the same time, and speaking with them, they were totally coherent, making normal conversation. The ambulance showed up. I could tell they were starting to lose focus and concentration a bit. You'd have to get their attention a little bit more. And by the time we got to the hospital, I wasn't with them for 20 minutes. Their grasp on reality was gone. Nurses would get the IV in. They were pulling it out. They wanted to tap on all the computer screens. They thought that I was their dad. And I left one of them eating their own sock. It's really, really sad to see that, especially with your own kids. But it just shows Benadryl, when abused, that's what it can do to you. They, I believe, each used a box of Benadryl, which I think is about 24 pills. Yeah, Piggly Wiggly, I think. So, and I ended up calling our businesses after and saying maybe we can get an ID check for people that are of a younger age, just to prevent this from happening, especially because it's sort of a challenge. And they said they all would. I don't know if they actually did, but I'm just doing what I can to protect them. And thankfully, we haven't had one, at least at the high school, since then. But the risk is always there, because people do this on social media. They try and promote it as this cool thing when really it's not. But kids will fall prey to that and they'll try it. So, what do I have on here? Heart rate and blood pressure skyrocket. It can cause seizures, coma, and death. Yeah, the heart rate for the students I was with were at about 180. And blood pressure was skyrocketing. They were sweating, and you could just tell. Actually, when I first saw them, I said, you guys are higher than a kite, because pupils get blown out, eyes almost look gray, and kind of glassy. And just something seems off. A lot of times when people are using these substances, you can just tell pretty quick, something seems a little hinky here. So, next up, I don't have a ton to say about this, because I haven't actually caught anyone here selling pills or being in possession of pills that they weren't supposed to. I do believe it's happening, though. I've probably had over 10 kids report that Adderall and Vyvanse, which are ADHD medications, are being sold. My understanding is a couple years ago at the high school, Xanax was a big one, which is anti-anxiety. But now it seems like more people want stimulants. So this can be abused. It's not something that's going to kill you, which is why it's further down my list. But it can still cause harm. The general way that you do it is you would get your pill, you would actually crush it up and snort it, and it hits your brain so quickly that it gives you kind of hyper focus. So it would almost be like taking cocaine, where you have this desire to move around. Sometimes it gives you social confidence. You want to get stuff done. And that's why people like it. I don't know if it helps them do better on tests, or if they're just really bored in school and they want to experiment with something. I haven't actually caught someone with it to understand the reasoning of why. But I can tell you that myself and security have both found these pills on the ground. And technically, any prescription pill, which this is, again, you can't be in possession of it if it's not prescribed to you, and you can't give it out to other people. If it's here, it's actually supposed to be in the health room, and you're supposed to go and take it from them. You can't even have it in your backpack. And so it's very strange that we found multiple pills that have just been on the ground, which tells me they're being passed hand to hand and someone just loses it. So I think it's up and coming, and we haven't caught anyone yet, but my guess is it's just a matter of time. The big hurdle is it's not like cough syrup or alcohol, where if they do it, it's very obvious. I don't know what signs exactly they would exhibit to show that, unless they just seem out of character and they admitted it. So that's my best guess. Up and coming trends. So, I don't remember if I asked this. Are you guys familiar with the potential for abuse with nasal sprays? No? Most people are not. I was not before a training that I went to over the summer, and now I'm a total believer. So there's kind of two different ways to abuse nasal sprays. Apparently, studies show that 1 in 4 adults in America are addicted to nasal sprays. I find that somewhat hard to believe, but ever since then, I check nasal spray sections in the grocery store. Almost every single time, it's completely wiped out. It's actually really hard to find in grocery stores.
Do you use it for allergies, or I don't even know what you use it for in a regular?
Yeah. So if you have allergies or you just have a hard time breathing through your nose, you can take it, and the antihistamine will actually contract your blood vessels, and so it'll open up your airways and you can breathe a little bit easier. And so that is the unintentional way that people get addicted to this. What it says is you're supposed to take 2 to 5 doses in no more than a 3-day period, 2 to 5 doses a day. And people will do that, and then they'll buy a second one because it's not working for allergy season, which is a month long. And all of a sudden they're on their 10th spray bottle, and then their 20th, and then they realize they're addicted. And it's extremely hard to get off of. And again, this is legal. And so for students to have this, I wouldn't necessarily bat an eye if they had it. But for people that are intentionally abusing it, it takes 10 seconds to do. You actually take your spray, you break the top of it off, and then there's normally a little screw that's plastic. Sometimes you can rip that off, or it takes 3 seconds to unscrew. And just like with vapes, what's inside is a cotton swab that has the chemical on there that has the antihistamine. Well, if you suck on that, it gets you high. And it's a short burst high. It normally lasts for about a half an hour. But you can do that, and then you're fine, and it only costs a few dollars. And so I've actually gotten somewhat knowledgeable in this world. What people like to do is you can break down the chemical off of the cotton if you put it in something acidic. So what people like to do is get a little bit of lemon juice. They'll soak this cotton swab for a few hours. They'll squeeze it all from a plastic bag that they cut a hole in, and they can literally drink lemon juice that will get them high. And you control your dosage by how much of the cotton you squeeze out. So some people will throw 2 or 3 cotton swabs in there, and it'll give them 3 times the high. So, again, it's the euphoric feeling, but it can cause psychosis, which I don't know exactly what that means or what it would look like, but obviously you're not in your right state of mind, and there's the risk for that. I don't know if it's permanent or not. I have yet to actually see it. The one thing I've seen that's somewhat similar is a couple cases of huffing, and that it just cuts off the oxygen to your brain for a split second, and it gets you high. I have seen it where someone passes out. It was actually in the Walmart parking lot. It took them 30 minutes to kind of come back around. But I have not seen huffing here. But nasal sprays, I think, is going to be a thing because as word spreads, and again, it's so easy to get. You keep it in your backpack. No one's going to think about it. But it's so easy to abuse. So and that's another thing you can check out on social media. The big one is called Benzodrex. It's kind of like the Dayquil of nasal sprays. And yeah, that's the one that people like to use because it's so easy to actually break it open. So just something to be aware of. Going into the crazier end of things, I don't know how likely this is to come, but it's something I've been made aware of through training. There are 4 different things that I'm only going to talk about for about 20 seconds each that I think would be very easily abused and students can get their hands on. These are all, one is illegal. Kratom's illegal in Wisconsin, but it's legal in Illinois, so you can still get your hands on it. They're all labeled as mood enhancers or dietary supplements or nootropics, which is supposed to be something that helps the brain, kind of like a vitamin. And you can get these in capsule form, powder form, a paste. Some of them you can put in a tea bag. Some of them you can even vape because you can get them into liquid form. But these things are called Kava, Tiana, Kratom, and Phenibut. They all do different things. They're either depressants or stimulants, and they have different effects on your body. But they either give you the desire to move around a little bit more, to get more done, or maybe they're an anti-anxiety, or it's kind of like a sedative if you just want to like chill out and relax. These things can all be found at gas stations, your basic smoke shops. And because other than Kratom, they're legal, I believe students could buy this stuff easily, and some of them probably do use it. And if you use it at an appropriate dosage, it actually does helpful things, but they're all highly addictive, and the ability to kind of upscale the amount that you use is easy because it's not like you buy a jar of it and there's only one dose in there. A lot of times there's 10, so you could use the whole thing at once and achieve that high that you're looking for. So those are just some things that are up and coming, and I believe I have some pictures on there of it. Yeah, it looks just like vitamins. So just some things to be aware of. If you ever see something, then you're like, it doesn't just say vitamin B, it has some weird word on there. Just take a look at what it is. And my advice is just do a little bit of Google research. See what that ingredient is in there and what it exactly does, and see if it's addictive. For a lot of these, like I mentioned, dextromethorphan or Benadryl, I think is like, where is it? Yeah, diphenhydramine. You can look up what exactly that does and the potential for abuse, and there's tons of articles and links that you can get into. So, just something to be aware of. Last thing I got is just how to prevent. I'm very wary of telling people how to parent because I only have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. You guys have been around the block with parenting a little bit more than I have, but I've noticed some trends for when students get into trouble, and a lot of it is that they're just unaware of what their child is doing. And so the big things that I say, just to sum up these 5 points, is don't ever let your kid think that they have autonomy with like a cell phone, or you not getting to go in their room to check stuff, or not getting to go into their car, or that you don't get to know their location. It's not just with substance abuse. I've had fights in parks. I've had sexual assaults. Every gambit of crime that there is, it basically happens when parents are like, oh, I didn't even know that they were out or that they were here. And so my big things are keep tabs on what your kid is. Try to get their location on a cell phone if they have one. That way you can always monitor where they are. I like the idea personally of contracts. So if you get your cell phone or a car, your grades will be here. If you mess up, you lose your rights to this. Because it just keeps them honest. And for parents that have sort of experienced this world a little bit and they decide to search their kid's room, I would say more often than not, I'm getting a call of like, I found this, this, and this. Can you tell me what it is? Because generally where there's smoke, there's fire. And so, if there's a concern and you actually do search and find something, I'm more than happy to help you figure out what it might be, or, try and figure out who they got it from. But just try and be involved and present. That's all I got. So that's my presentation. 50 minutes, not bad. You guys have any questions about any of that stuff? No?
Okay, so when you're doing searches around school with the dog, and what exactly are you doing? Like, are you
So-
going into a classroom with kids in there?
Good question. So I hope I'm not speaking out of turn by bringing some of this stuff up, but no. So the way we do it, we have 2 different modes. We have outdoor searches in nicer weather months, and then indoor searches for the colder weather. Outdoor searches is strictly cars. And the dogs are good enough that if there's odor in there that's even 3 weeks old, they will still alert on the car, which means they have certain physical signs of indication to say, yes, there's drugs in there. And only the handler is trained to know what those are. They'll say, like, yes, you can go in this car and legally search it. If a dog alerts on anything, it actually gives police probable cause to go in there. Meaning, if the kid were to refuse, we would actually arrest them for not cooperating, because we have the legal right to go in there now. So same thing with the backpack. For indoor searches, per school district policy, we don't let the dog go anywhere near kids for allergies and safety reasons. So what we'll actually do, it's generally me and one of the associate principals, we'll go into a class and say, per school district policy, we're doing a canine-assisted drug search of this room. Please leave all your belongings, including cell phones, here, and you'll be escorted into a different room. So they'll go into what we call the holding room, and then the dog will come in once it's empty. The dog basically sniffs all of the backpacks, and their general sign of indication is pawing at something. And so if there is a backpack, they're like, yep, that's a good one. They paw at it. They'll generally have them do it 2 or 3 more times just to really make sure the dog's not just like screwing around. And then we know to pull that backpack and figure out who that kid is to search both them, their car, their locker, and their stuff. So it's somewhat involved. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. We try and hit 7 to 10 classrooms each time, and it's randomized, so we never target a student or a classroom.
Does the student have an opportunity to put something else that they're carrying in somebody else's backpack?
They do. That's the thing that gets really tricky with the kids that we catch, and this is adults too. I've had guys that have drugs in their pants pocket. That's not mine. I'm like, well, what do you mean? These aren't my pants. I'm like, come on. And so kids are kind of the same way. Well, like a friend gave it to me and just asked me to hold it. I'd say that's the most common one that I hear. And everyone knows the game at this point. You can't be in possession. They just want to save their image a little bit. And we'll generally allow that. Like, oh, just next time, make sure you're not doing that. But we still kind of have to enforce, consequences for you being in possession. I've yet to say, like, for a kid to say, this definitely is not mine. Someone put it in there. If they did, we would end up pulling other kids and just interviewing to see kind of what they would say. But at the end of the day, possession is possession. They need a really good argument, or if they seemed like a kid that would just never touch it, for us to believe it. So, say the majority of the people that we catch, they're in the group. So, we'll have caught someone and then someone else in the group a couple months later. And now for them to get caught, it's like we kind of already know what their group is about, and so it's not necessarily surprising for them to be caught. Any other questions?
So the kids that you're catching, when I went to high school, we knew what the
Mm-hmm.
So are you finding kids like all across the board now? Kids that are good in sports, or kids who are getting good grades, and are you finding stuff from everybody?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually forgot to mention that. Yes. So I would say you still kind of have your groups of your jocks. There are still what I would consider like the burnouts. You still have like your more like nerdy group. And so I would say the kids that you would never suspect, a good bet that they're not. If there's a kid that's always been a goody two-shoes but is like sporty, for the most part, they're kind of steering clear. If you're anywhere towards like the middle of the spectrum, most likely they have vaped in the last month or vape regularly. I ask every kid, where do you get it and who'd you get it from? And then I always ask too, how many people would you say vape here? I generally hear, I've never heard below 50% of the students here, and I've heard as high as 90. Generally, it's somewhere around like 60 to 70%. That's why I say it's swept through, and that's nationwide. And all the studies show that that's pretty accurate. Even at the middle school level, maybe not Muskego so much, but maybe so. It's around like 30%. So it's taken over. And I'll be honest, we have to enforce laws and school policy, but we're not going to like ticket kids out of this problem. There's going to have to be some kind of sweeping change nationally to fix it, because just like with the marijuana industry, as we kind of implement things to catch kids, they get wise to it, and then they just change their tactics of how to not get caught. And so it's not necessarily ever going to eliminate the problem. We just might be unaware of what they're doing now, but then once we get wise, they'll just change it again. Slightly depressing. And they're kids that I've known them since 5th or 6th grade, because I was at the middle school with them. For the first few months, I was shocked, because you hear through the grapevine, like, oh, they vape. Or, kids will sometimes even tell me, like, yeah, I vape, but they won't have one on them, and there's nothing I can really do. I'll try and call parents when I can. A lot of parents even know, and I think I said it earlier, but they'll buy their kids, the nicotine gum or patches to help. But yeah, if you're anywhere in that middle of the spectrum where you're like kind of popular, but not like a quote unquote bad kid, I would probably say most likely vaping.
So every time you have an interaction with a student, you're calling parents and stuff?
For the most part. If I'm just saying hi in the cafeteria, like catching up, no. But if I have to actually bring them into my office or talk to them about an actual issue, I do. Either me or the principal.
Would you say that Muskego is pretty average as far as, these kind of issues? Because I'm shocked. This was kind of like a 3-part series. The last 3 months, there was the first month they did that bedroom search.
Yeah.
Last month there was something different, and every time there's only been just a couple people in the audience, and that just floors me, because I always thought maybe there was, we had a bigger problem with that here, but
Yeah.
maybe we don't.
So
People want to close their eyes and pretend it's not there.
yeah, and I don't want to speak out of turn with this either. I believe there are parents that don't necessarily find it a problem. So I was shocked when I first started as a police officer. I was raised in a more traditional household, and most of my friends, like, we didn't mess around with too much alcohol. And when we were at an age that it started, it wasn't anything with like parental involvement. There are a decent number of parties with underage drinking where the parents are actually buying it for like the party, and are there and present and well aware. Like I wouldn't say every party, but it's kind of shocking how often you hear that. There are plenty of kids that have said, "Yeah, my parents buy me vapes," or like my parents don't care that I do it, or like this one is almost out. My mom let me use it so that she can buy a new one. And so I don't know if it's, I, I have no idea why that is the trend, but I would say probably lack of interest and not being aware of how catastrophic it could be to actually get addicted to this. So.
So if kids are having a party and the parents have bought the alcohol for underage kids, that's okay? Nobody gets in trouble?
No, it does get tricky. So let's say you're with your child, they're at an age that it's not going to kill them if they have like a sip of beer or even a beer. Legally, you're allowed to provide that. You can even buy them alcohol at a restaurant. It definitely gets into a gray area with the parties because as long as they're in the house, technically, if every other parent gives consent for alcohol to be supplied, then there's nothing we can do. But with every underage drinking party, what happens is it spills out into the yard. They start chasing each other, running around. And as soon as it gets outside and causes a disturbance, that parent is no longer in control that's actually at the party because they're not supervising. And then we can write them a ticket for supplying alcohol to underage kids. And we have written that ticket before. The majority of them, it's just like your kids that are home from college and they're just drinking around the campfire. Parents might be inside. They always, act surprised. But there are some where the kids are in the kitchen with the parent, and the parent's like pouring vodka. And that was a little bit of a surprise for me, like as a parent, when I think of what I want my kid to be like at 14 to 18 years old. That's not it, and not in that scene. But for other people, it doesn't bother them. So. Yeah, and will most of them be fine? Yeah. Will some of them get in trouble or get a drunk driving very young? Yeah, like there's always the risk there. Yeah. And, some of it too is probably, a lot of these kids, because I worked at the middle school, they have iPhone 13s in like 5th grade. And I think that they really get distant from their parents because they live a life with their friends through their phone. And so parents probably don't have much involvement because it's easy to get stuff done around the house while they just sit on the screen. And so maybe they're like, go and live your life, and because it's been that way for years. I don't know. That's kind of my like spitballing at the problem. I don't think this is. I'd say Muskego's pretty average for suburbs. It's much worse in the cities because the way the corridors kind of work for all of this stuff is it starts on like the coasts, especially with hard drugs, but really just trends in general. It works its way to the Midwest, and for here specifically, it generally goes from Chicago and Minneapolis up to Milwaukee and Madison, and then it kind of like spreads to all the cities in between. So we're kind of like the last stop in the country for a lot of this. But, we always catch up eventually. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Heck yeah, I love it. Yeah, my 4-year-old, ton of board games he knows how to play by now. I taught him how to play War like a week ago, and and that's how he's going to grow up too. We try and limit the screen time. Yeah. It's kind of a depressing, because I know there was like 3 parts to this, and I'm sure all of them are like, you really got to be careful. But just having actually been here and experienced it, and then being able to share like what I'm actually seeing our student population doing, it is a little bit of a bummer because really most of them probably are great kids and they might be dabbling in vapes, but it's not going to kill them. But just to hear of all the different issues we have with all the different substances, I mean, it's been really shocking this year.
So you're just not sitting in your office twiddling your thumbs, you've got stuff to do every day.
It's been a really busy year, because that's on top of, again, anytime I have to make an arrest, all of the car accidents in the parking lot. I try and revamp, like traffic things. I have responsibilities with the SWAT team. I'm working with the principals constantly with like this issue or that issue. I work with Jen Giggle, our social worker, for some of the more like at-risk kids and how can we help them. or like counsel them into like not breaking certain laws, where we're just trying to give more like resources. I try really hard to not just be like the hammer of punishment on them, which sometimes I have to be, but I really try and like come alongside and like, listen, I may have to do this to you in the future, but like let's maybe treat this as a learning moment and like change our course. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So yeah, I appreciate you guys coming, faithful few. But no, this is way more comfortable than like talking into a microphone to, 200 people. So yeah. Any other questions or anything? No? Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, thank you both for coming. I appreciate it. Yeah.